The words weren't shouted. They dropped into the room like stones into still water, quiet but heavy enough to ripple through everything. You need to stop interfering, Marcus. You're just living off us in our house. I was crouched by the front door, lining up shoes the way Dorothy used to insist on, back when our little place in Macon still smelled like her peach cobbler and pine sol. I didn't turn around. Didn't need to. I knew Shanice's voice, knew that particular tone she used when she'd made up her mind about something and wasn't looking for discussion. My hands froze on Jerome's work boot, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Just felt this weight settling on my shoulders, like I'd been carrying it all along, and only now noticed how heavy it was. It was right after dinner. Sweet potato casserole still warm on the stove. Cornbread crumbs on the counter. The kind of evening that should have felt like home, but instead felt like I was visiting someone else's life. I stayed bent over those shoes, counting seconds, understanding in some deep place that if I stood up right then, if I turned around and let them see my face, something would break that couldn't be fixed. So I stayed low, kept my breathing steady, let the moment pass over me like I'd learned to do with so many other things. That night I sat in the small room at the end of the hallway, the one they'd cleared out for me when I first moved in. Used to be Jerome's home office. Now it was mine, I guess, though it never quite felt that way. I listened to the dishwasher, humming its familiar cycle. Listened to my son's voice in the next room, low and steady, talking to his wife about weekend plans, grocery lists, things that didn't include my name. I asked myself when silence meant to keep peace turned into proof that a man no longer had the right to speak. When did my presence become something to manage instead of welcome? I'm 68 years old. Worked 35 years for CSX Railroad, Maintenance Division, making sure trains ran on time from Atlanta to Savannah and back again. Spent my whole career understanding that everything needs to be in working order, that when something breaks, you stop and fix it proper. But in my own family, I'd done the opposite. When things started feeling wrong, I just went quieter. Told myself it was temporary. Told myself I was doing right by not making waves. 3 years back, Dorothy died. Stroke took her fast, one Tuesday morning while I was out getting her diabetes medication from the Walgreens on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Came home to find her on the kitchen floor, still holding her coffee cup. The paramedics said she was already gone, said there was nothing I could have done different. But that didn't stop me from replaying that morning about 10,000 times, wondering if I'd missed something. Some sign I should have caught. The house we'd shared for 42 years felt wrong after that. Too big, too quiet. I'd set 2 plates for dinner out of habit, and put one back. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, reaching for her side of the bed, finding only empty space. That winter, Jerome drove down from Savannah and sat with me for a whole afternoon just to say one thing. "Come live with us, Dad. You shouldn't be alone like this." I didn't think much about it then. Seemed natural. Seemed like what family does. I sold the house, packed up what mattered into cardboard boxes, brought Dorothy's picture frame, my old toolbox, a few clothes. Thought I was moving toward something better, toward family, toward not being so alone with my grief. Didn't realize I was stepping into a different kind of loneliness, the kind where you're surrounded by people, but still invisible. First few months were good. Real good. Shanice cooked meals that reminded me of Dorothy's Sunday dinners. Collard greens with ham hocks, macaroni and cheese with that golden crust on top, fried chicken that crackled just right. Zara, my 8-year-old granddaughter, would run downstairs every morning, braids bouncing, laughing about something she dreamed or something funny at school. I felt useful then. I'd pick her up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Waiting in the car line at her elementary school, listening to old Marvin Gaye on the radio, watching kids stream out through those double doors. Zara loved telling me things. Small things adults forget matter. Who sat next to who at lunch. How she got a B- on her spelling test and was mad about it. How her teacher, Miss Robinson, was strict but fair. Those conversations made me feel connected, like I still had a role in this family beyond just taking up space in the back bedroom. Then things shifted. Can't say exactly when. Maybe when the family calendar appeared on the refrigerator and my name stopped showing up on school pickup duty. Maybe when Shanna started saying, "I'll handle it," instead of "Marcus, can you help me with this?" At first I told myself they were busy, that if I could help less, that was fine. I was retired anyway. What else did I have to do but stay out of the way? Until one Thursday afternoon when I put on my jacket to go get Zara like always. And Shanna stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, looking at me with that expression women get when they've decided something and are just waiting for you to catch up. "Marcus," she said, voice gentle but firm, "starting next week, we're letting Zara take the bus. I think it's better for her independence if she learns to manage the routine herself." I stood there, car keys in my hand, jacket half zipped. I nodded. Didn't ask what she meant by independence. Didn't ask why my granddaughter learning to be independent had to start with her grandfather not being there. Just nodded, hung my jacket back up, set the keys on the counter, walked to my room. That night Zara knocked on my door, poked her head in. "Granddaddy, why didn't you pick me up today?" I smiled, patted her head with its neat cornrows Shannis had done over the weekend. "Granddaddy was tired, baby." She looked at me for a few seconds, like she could see through that excuse, then turned and left. When the door clicked shut, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. Same hands that had repaired coupling systems and brake assemblies for 35 years. Strong hands. Capable hands. Now they were shaking just a little. I started noticing other changes. Small decisions made without asking me. I wasn't consulted about fixing the loose cabinet in the kitchen anymore. Wasn't asked about the electric bill or whether we should switch providers. I was still there at dinner, still eating with everyone, but my presence felt thinner, like a chair nobody uses anymore, but hasn't gotten around to moving. There were moments I wanted to speak up. Wanted to ask Jerome if he was okay, if he could see what was happening. But every time I opened my mouth, I saw his tired face after work, saw Shannis juggling Zara's homework and her own job at the bank, and I chose silence. Thought I was doing right. Thought I was being considerate. Until that night after dinner. Until those words dropped quiet and certain. "You need to stop interfering, Marcus. You're just living off us in her house." I didn't sleep that night. Sat in the wooden chair by the window, listening to wind move through the Georgia pines outside, listening to the house settle into its evening rhythms, like nothing had changed. I wondered when I'd stopped being someone with a voice. Wondered when my silence had been mistaken for agreement. Near dawn, when I thought everyone was asleep, I heard Jerome's voice in the living room. Not loud, not harsh. Just a passing comment to Shannis. Something about me needing to understand my place, about how he appreciated everything I'd done raising him, but things were different now. I stood in the dark hallway, hand on the doorframe, and understood clearly that my silence all this time had been misread entirely. After that night, things changed in me. Small things. I started asking permission before opening a window. Started asking if it was okay to make tea at night. Once I stood in the kitchen for a full minute wondering if I should ask before pouring myself orange juice from the fridge I'd helped pay for when I first moved in. Nobody demanded this. But a new habit formed. The habit of a man afraid of being a burden. Dinner conversations got shorter. Laughter appeared in careful doses. Everything became polite. I stopped hearing, What do you think, Dad? Instead, I heard announcements. Dinner's at 6. We're busy this weekend. Company's coming over Tuesday. I nodded. Got used to being informed instead of included. One afternoon, I took out Dorothy's small cedar box, the one she kept her special things in. Old photos. Her grandmother's wedding ring. A half-finished crochet blanket she'd been making for Zara. I set the box on the coffee table in the living room where the sunlight came through, warm and golden. Shanice walked by, stopped, looked at the box, then at me. Marcus, don't leave personal things in the living room. It makes the space feel cluttered. She said it calmly, like reminding someone to wipe their feet. I looked at the box, looked around the room. Everything was clean, organized, magazine perfect. I nodded, picked up the box, carried it back to my room, set it on the shelf. When I closed the door, I realized this was the first time Dorothy's memory had been treated like clutter. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the years when I'd been the man of my own house. Back then, I belonged. I came and went freely, fixed things, hung pictures where Dorothy wanted them. When Jerome was small, he'd follow me around asking questions, and I'd answer, even when I wasn't sure of the answer myself. I used to be someone whose presence didn't need permission. Now I felt like furniture. Still there, but nobody really saw me anymore. I started asking myself, is my silence protecting this family or erasing me? I'd stayed quiet thinking I was keeping peace. But the quieter I got, the smaller I became, like an object tucked neatly into a corner where it won't bother anyone. I didn't blame Shanice. Didn't blame Jerome. They were living their lives the best way they knew how. I just started questioning my own choices. Jerome avoided real conversation. If I asked, "You doing okay, son?" he'd say, "I'm fine, Dad." If I mentioned things feeling different, he'd go quiet, then change the subject. His silence wasn't accidental. It was a choice. A choice not to deal with what was happening. Looking at my son, I understood he was stuck between his wife and his father. But that didn't make it easier. Some mornings I sat alone at the dining table, listening to Zara getting ready upstairs. She still ran down to hug me, but it was rushed. I realized I wasn't part of the morning routine anymore. I began writing in my old work notebook, the one with yellowed pages and a worn leather cover. I didn't write to complain. I wrote to remember. To mark the moments when I stayed silent, when I nodded, when I stepped back. Each line was evidence. Nobody else saw it, but I saw clearly. One morning I went to get the mail. Bills stacked neatly. But something caught my eye. The electric bill. The account name had changed. Used to say Marcus Washington and Jerome Washington. Now it just said Jerome Washington. I stood there holding that paper, feeling like I'd discovered a door had been locked and nobody told me. I didn't know when it happened. Just knew it was done. Quiet, clean, like so many other things. I folded the paper, put it in the drawer like it was just another bill. Didn't say anything. Didn't ask Jerome about it. But from that moment, I started paying closer attention. Not with suspicion. With awareness. I realized my name was disappearing from decisions. Plumber scheduled without telling me. Wi-Fi password changed, and I had to ask Zara for it. Insurance company called, and Shanice took the phone, said she'd handle it faster. I stood there hearing my voice replaced without explanation. Not one weekend Jerome handed me papers. Just for convenience, Dad. Household stuff. Payment authorizations. Just routine. He spoke fast. Didn't look at me directly. I held those papers, felt the weight of them. Flipped through. Small print. Legal terms. Blank signature lines. Jerome pointed. Just sign here. I remembered something then. Jerome at 16, holding his learner's permit, excited. I'd told him, "Son, you never sign anything unless you read it and understand it. Don't let anybody rush you." I looked at the papers in my hands now. Read slowly. The more I read, the less my name appeared. Not gone completely. Just reduced. Symbolic dot. I looked up at Jerome. He avoided my eyes. Shanna stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, saying nothing. I didn't sign. I folded the papers, set them on the table. I need time to think about this. No explanation. No argument. One short sentence. Then I stood up and walked to my room. First time I'd done that. Not resisting. Not rebelling. Just pausing. After that day, the atmosphere shifted clearly. Nobody was angry. But distance took shape. Conversations happened when I wasn't around. Living room door closed more often. Jerome got more polite, but more distant. I felt space growing. Not from one big fight. From small choices I hadn't stopped. Zara was the only one who didn't change toward me. One night she knocked, came in with a book, sat next to me. Didn't read right away. "Granddaddy, are you sad?" The question was so direct, so child honest, it stopped me cold. I didn't know how to answer. Said I was okay. She looked at me a few seconds, then rested her head on my arm, like the answer mattered less than just being there. After she left, I sat alone a long time, thought about how children see what adults hide. They don't understand reasons, but they feel atmosphere. I realized my silence wasn't just affecting me. It was teaching Zara how to accept being pushed aside. I opened my notebook, wrote a few more lines, not blaming anyone, just acknowledging truth. The problem was never money or paperwork. Wasn't about losing authority to sign things. What weighed on me most was losing the right to exist as someone with a voice. I used to think if I didn't cause trouble, I'd be allowed to stay. But now I understood. Staying without being seen is also a kind of leaving. Only your body remains. That realization came slow, but certain. Like the last puzzle piece clicking into place. And once it was there, I knew I could never go back to being the man I was before. Some families don't need shouting matches to drift apart. Everything keeps running smooth on the surface. Meals stay on schedule. Words stay polite. But underneath, nobody touches what really matters anymore. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone knows something shifted. When a man stops bending over backward to keep everyone comfortable, what happens? Does the empty space get filled? Or does it just show the truth everyone been avoiding? I didn't have answers back then. Just knew I couldn't keep living at that old pace. Not from anger. Not to prove nothing. My body just adjusted, like it was tired of asking permission to exist. I started making small changes. Mornings, I woke earlier, made my own coffee, took it out to the back porch, sat in the wooden rocker Jerome's grandfather built back in the day. Used to wait for everyone to wake up before having breakfast, trying to stay in rhythm with the house. Now I didn't. I ate when I was hungry, walked when I felt like it. Didn't explain myself. Afternoons, instead of sitting in the living room waiting for dinner, I drove around the neighborhood. Georgia roads in late fall are something else. Live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Leaves turning gold and burnt orange. Air crisp enough to wake you up. I realized I'd gotten so used to waiting for someone to call, "Marcus, dinner's ready," that I'd forgotten what it felt like to decide my own time. Then came the evenings. First day, I didn't come to dinner. Just said I wasn't hungry. Went to my room early, read, turned off the light. I heard plates clinking outside, chairs scraping. Nobody knocked to check if I was okay. For a minute. That stung. But right after came relief, like I'd finally set down a bag I'd been carrying too long. Days that followed, My absence from dinner became normal. Tables stayed full, but one familiar seat stayed empty. I didn't know what they said about me when I wasn't there. Didn't want to know. Just noticed that meals I walked past felt different, quieter, neater, more distant. One evening, I went to the kitchen for water. Shanice sat at the head of the table, Jerome beside her. They stopped talking when they saw me. I nodded, poured my water, walked away. Moment was brief, but clear enough. My presence had become something to manage, not something natural. Strange thing was, I didn't hurt as much as I expected. Felt lighter. But that lightness came with loneliness, so sharp I could taste it. I spent more time alone. In that quiet, I heard my own thoughts clearer than I had in years. Realized that for most of my life, I'd existed through roles. Husband, father, grandfather, railroad man. When those roles got smaller, I was forced to face a question I'd been avoiding. If I stopped trying to please everyone, who am I? Another evening, after I finished a simple meal in my room, there was a knock. Shanice stood there. Didn't come in. Just leaned against the doorframe, hallway light casting shadows across her face, making her expression harder to read. "Marcus," she said. Not loud, not soft, just measured. "How long you planning to do this?" Wasn't a question born from curiosity. Was more like setting a boundary, asking me to define mine. I looked at her a few seconds. Realized this was the first time she'd asked me something without trying to smooth things over. Not complaining, not concerned, just wanting to know where things stood. I didn't answer right away. Didn't know how to answer correctly. Just knew I didn't want to explain myself no more. Said I was living in a way that felt right for me at this point. Sounded vague, but it was the truest thing I could say. Shanice nodded. Didn't say nothing else. Turned and walked away. Door closed soft. I stood there long time, hand still on the doorknob, feeling like I'd just crossed some line I couldn't come back from. That night, I sat by the window watching streetlights cast their glow on the bare oak branches. Thought about the question nobody asked out loud. What happens when a man stops trying to please everyone? Maybe first thing that happens is discomfort for folks used to him always giving in. Maybe next thing is emptiness. I didn't know where this story was headed. Just knew that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't automatically adjusting myself to fit someone else's rhythm. And in that quiet, I felt it clearly. This change wasn't stopping here. I said no on an ordinary morning. Nothing dramatic about it. Shanice stood at the kitchen counter, phone pressed to her ear, voice low but decisive. She was arranging weekend plans. Who'd take Zara to gymnastics? Who'd pick her up? Who'd stop for groceries? I was folding a dish towel, same one I'd used to cover Dorothy's picture frame the night before when I'd brought it to the living room. Then quietly took it back to my room. When Shanice turned toward me, her eyes paused like she just remembered I was still standing there. "Marcus," she said, "can you stay home Saturday afternoon and watch Zara? Jerome and I got something we need to handle." Before, I would have nodded automatically. Not because I was free, but because I believed my presence needed to be useful. This time, I heard myself answer. Slow, clear. "No. Saturday afternoon, I got my own plans." No explanation. No apologetic smile. Just a sentence standing there like a fact. Shanice didn't raise her voice. Didn't look shocked. Her reaction was cool, precise, almost rehearsed. She nodded. Turned back to her phone. "Okay, I'll figure it out." Nothing more. Didn't ask what my plans were. No irritation in her voice. But that absence of emotion made the kitchen air feel thick. I realized then, to Shanice, me saying no wasn't shocking. It was inconvenient. Jerome sat at the table, coffee mug in hand. Didn't look up. Didn't say nothing. The way he stayed silent didn't feel like avoiding conflict. Felt like a decision already made. Stay still. Let everything play out. I looked at my son and understood something real clear. Jerome's silence wasn't just habit no more. It was a position. I wasn't angry. Wasn't sharply disappointed. Just took note, the way you notice seasons changing. Don't blame the weather, but can't pretend you don't feel the cold. When Shanice left the kitchen, Jerome finally looked at me. His eyes passed over me quick, like he was weighing whether to say something. In the end, all he said was, "Don't overthink it, Dad." That sentence used to comfort me. Now it didn't. I realized, don't overthink it sometimes just means, don't make this uncomfortable. I took my coffee to the back porch. Sat in the rocker. Late autumn wind moved through the trees. I pulled my jacket tighter. In that moment, I knew I'd been waiting for this. The moment when I could say no without explaining, without apologizing, without trying to make everyone feel better. And strangely, when it happened, I didn't feel victorious. Felt a quiet sadness, like I'd just confirmed something I'd known a long time, but hoped was wrong. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood longer than usual. Brick houses, trimmed lawns, American flags on porches. I'd lived here 3 years. Thought this was where I'd grow old with my family close. But walking those streets, I started thinking serious about leaving. Not from anger. From clarity. That evening I ate alone in my room. Heard Zara laughing in the living room. Heard Shanice's voice. Jerome's voice. Didn't feel excluded exactly. Just felt like I was standing outside a circle. I once believed I belonged to Dot after dinner. Zara knocked. Came in with her coloring book. Climbed on my bed, sat cross-legged like always. "Granddaddy?" She said soft. "You're not watching me Saturday no more?" I nodded. Didn't know the right words, so I chose simple truth. "I got my own plans, baby." Zara was quiet a moment. Looked down at her book. Looked back at me. No calculation in her eyes. No politeness. Just a question aimed straight at what adults usually dodge. "Are you leaving for good?" Question hung there. Light as a feather. Heavy as stone. I didn't answer quick. Looked at her. At her cornrows done neat by Shanice last Sunday. At her small hands gripping that book. "Why you ask that?" I said. Zara shrugged. "Because you stay in your room more. And you don't eat with us." I realized then, children notice changes adults pretend not to see. I put my hand on her back. Felt that familiar warmth. "I'm not going nowhere yet," I said. "But maybe one day I'll live somewhere else." Zara nodded, like that answer was enough. Didn't ask more. Just rested her head on my shoulder a moment. Then climbed down. "I like when you hear," she said before leaving, door closed. I sat there long time, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall. In that quiet, I understood. The decision to leave wasn't just a passing thought no more. It was taking shape. Slow but clear. I didn't resent Jerome. Didn't resent Shanice. Everyone was living the way they believed was right. But for the first time, I let myself ask, not how much should I endure, but how do I want to live the rest of my life? And when I turned off the light and lay down, Zara's question stayed with me. Not loud, not demanding, but enough to let me know that sooner or later I'd have to answer it. Not just for her. For myself, I didn't tell nobody I was preparing to leave. Not because I wanted to surprise them. Because I knew some decisions, if spoken too early, turn into arguments. I didn't have energy for that. Started with small things. Just enough to know I was serious. Took the old suitcase down from the attic. Had sat in the corner for years, covered in dust. Wiped it slow, like each pass of my hand confirmed I was stepping into another chapter. Wasn't rushing. Had nowhere I needed to be right away. This preparation didn't feel like running. Felt more like organizing papers before changing jobs. Careful, quiet, intentional. Started with clothes. Chose only what I actually wore. Sweaters worn thin at the elbows. Few old shirts still smelling faintly of Tide. Left behind the dress shirts Shanice bought me to look more polished. Didn't resent them. Just weren't mine. I realized how used I'd become to keeping things. Just to avoid upsetting folks. Each evening, I packed a little. Not much. Arranged things neat in the suitcase. Then closed it. Some nights I opened it again, stared inside long time, took something out, put it back. Not from attachment. Just wanted to be sure I was choosing, not being pushed. In those quiet moments, I saw clear the difference between running away and choosing. Running comes with fear, racing heart, urge to disappear. What I was doing didn't feel like that. Wasn't scared. Was stopping at the right moment before I faded any further. Shanice spoke less. Didn't ask what I was doing, but I knew she noticed. Meals passed quicker. She stopped reminding me of schedules. Stopped asking for help with small tasks. Her silence wasn't hostile. Felt like a door slowly closing. Soft enough not to make noise. Jerome avoided me more noticeably. Came home late. Left early. When we passed in the hallway, he nodded. Smiled thin. Didn't blame my son. Understood that facing my departure meant admitting something been wrong a while. He wasn't ready. I didn't explain myself to them. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I didn't want to turn this decision into a defense. Didn't need them to understand right away. Just needed to understand myself. One afternoon, reorganizing a drawer, Zara peeked in. Looked at me. Looked at the open suitcase. Didn't ask nothing. Disappeared a moment. Came back holding a paper folded in 4. Placed it gentle on top of the clothes, like she was afraid of disturbing something. I drew this for you, she said. I unfolded it. Simple drawing. A house. A tree. 2 figures standing side by side. One tall, one short. Taller one wore a hat. Smaller one had braids. In the corner, written in uneven letters, for Granddaddy. I didn't say nothing. Folded the drawing careful. Placed it in the deepest pocket of the suitcase. Zara watched, making sure I kept it. I nodded. I'll keep it safe. She smiled. Ran off. Footsteps fading. In that moment, I understood real clear. I hadn't lost everything. Could leave this house, but wasn't leaving behind all the love that existed here. Some of it stayed real, intact, in small things adults often overlook. That night, I sat by the window. Watched lights from houses across the street. Didn't feel as heavy as before. Leaving when it's not about escape carries strange calm. Didn't know where I'd live. How I'd start again. But for the first time in a long while, didn't feel like I was disappearing from nobody's life. Was just stepping into different space where my presence didn't need permission. When I zipped the suitcase closed, sound was soft. But to me, it was the sound of a choice completed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just an older man finally letting himself stand upright in what's left of his life. There are moments before a farewell that don't come with shouting or tears or accusations. They arrive so quiet, you might mistake them for an ordinary evening. But it's at that edge where the question becomes clear. When someone sets a boundary for themselves, is that selfish? Or is it simply the last way to stop fading? I chose the evening to speak, not to make it formal, but because the house was settled then. Zara was in her room. Television in the living room, turned off earlier than usual. I stood in the kitchen looking at the table already cleared. its wooden surface catching the warm overhead light. There was a pause inside me, like my body asking, now or never? Jerome, I said. Not loud. I need to talk. My son looked up. His eyes held for a moment. Then he nodded. Shanic. He looked at me too. Set down her cup. Didn't ask what I wanted to say. Maybe she already knew. I didn't stand. Sat in the familiar chair. Placed both hands flat on the table. Didn't have no speech prepared. Just had clarity. I'm moving out, I said. Not tomorrow, but soon. Sentence landed in the middle of the table. Gentle but firm, I waited. Not for objections. For my own reaction. Heart wasn't racing. Hands weren't shaking. I realized I'd already said these words to myself 1,000 times. Shanice spoke first. Didn't frown. Didn't look shocked. You found a place? She asked just that one question. No blame. No why. No attempt to hold me back. Her tone was practical. Almost businesslike, I nodded. Side-eye was looking at a few options. Nothing final yet. Jerome stayed quiet. Looked at the tabletop. Then at me. His eyes weren't hard. But they weren't soft either. I saw in them familiar exhaustion. Exhaustion of someone always standing in the middle, scared to choose a side. If you need help, he said slowly, just say so. That was all. No, stay a little longer. No, let me talk to Shanice. Nothing to pull me back. I wasn't surprised. Just felt another confirmation. Everyone in this house had gotten used to keeping distance in their own way. What surprised me was my own feeling. I'd prepared for resistance, for uncomfortable looks, for words that would make me defend myself. But none of that happened. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody argued. In the absence of all that made the room heavier than any noise could have, Shanice stood first, gathered a few things from the table. Sighed she had to get up early next day. Before leaving, she turned back. Looked at me brief. I hope you find a place that suits you, she said. Not a blessing. Not a dismissal. Just a properly spoken sentence. I nodded. Thanked her. She went upstairs. Jerome stayed a little longer. Turned a spoon in his hand. Set it down. Looked at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Stood up. Patted my shoulder. Familiar gesture. Very sun-like. And followed Shanice upstairs. I sat alone in the kitchen. Wall clock ticked soft. I realized this was the heaviest silence I'd ever felt. Not because something stayed unsaid, but because everything had been said without needing more words. Didn't feel pushed out. Didn't feel light with relief either. Felt empty. But it was a clean emptiness. No resentment. Like a room just cleared of furniture, ready for another purpose. I walked past the living room. Looked at the chair where I used to read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution every morning. Remembered thinking that if I left, I'd be deeply sad. But now I just felt a sadness that fit. Didn't spill over. Didn't ask nobody to make it better. When I got back to my room, Zara was standing by the door. Wasn't asleep yet. She looked at me, then at the closed suitcase. Did you tell them? She asked. I nodded. What'd they say? They said it's okay, I answered. Everyone's fine. Zara thought a moment, then asked something I didn't expect. What's a boundary, Granddaddy? I smiled gentle. Took a moment to think, then answered in words I believed a child could understand. It's knowing where your place is, I said, and not stepping into someone else's space, but also not letting nobody step into yours. Zara nodded like it made sense. She hugged me quick, then ran back to her room. I stood there still feeling the warmth on my back. That night, I lay in bed looking at the familiar ceiling one last time. Didn't ask myself if I was being selfish no more. I understood that boundaries aren't about turning your back on love. They're the only way to love without losing yourself. And in that heavy silence, I knew one thing. This goodbye wouldn't be loud, but it would change everything. The place I moved into was smaller than I imagined. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, kitchenette just big enough to make coffee and heat up leftovers. Window looked out on a parking lot. No trees. No children playing. First night, I stood in the empty room, suitcase at the foot of the bed, and realized something strange. The quiet here didn't scare me. Opened the window a crack. Cold air rushed in, carrying smell of asphalt and distant sound of I-75 traffic. Hung my jacket on a hook. Placed Zara's drawing on the small table beside the bed. Nothing else was needed. Room was enough. And in that sense of enough, I didn't feel like I was missing nothing important. First morning, I woke up. Nobody called my name. No footsteps in the hallway. No clink of spoon against cup. I made coffee. Sat in a simple wooden chair, watching morning light spread across the floor. Waited to see how my body would react. Would I feel sad? Empty? Yes, but not much. And not enough to knock me down. I began resetting my rhythm. Walking every morning. Eating when I was hungry. Sleeping when I was tired. Things that seemed small, but that I'd let slip from my hands too long. Sometimes I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my older face. Deeper lines at the corners of my eyes. Gray-beard Dorothy used to trim for me on Sunday mornings. Didn't see someone weaker. Saw someone who'd stopped bracing. One afternoon I sat on the bed, listening to rain tap light against the window frame. Thought back to days right after Dorothy died, when I believed I couldn't live alone no more. Thought I needed someone around. A crowded house so the absence wouldn't be so loud. But now I realized something different. Loneliness don't come from being alone. It comes from being in the wrong place. My phone buzzed. Jerome calling. I looked at the screen a few seconds before answering. You okay, Dad? I'm okay, I said. And it was true. He gave me updates from the house. Zara started a new art class. Shanice changed her work schedule at the bank. No apology. No justification. Just information delivered the way people talk about the weather. I listened. Didn't expect nothing else. When you free, Jerome said, let me know. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. Okay, call ended neat. I set the phone down without feeling let down. I realized my expectations had changed. I didn't wait for someone to notice how much I'd sacrificed no more. Just needed them to know I was still here. In my own way, that night I took out my old notebook. The one I brought from Macon. The one I used to jot down work schedules, measurements, things to remember. Turned to a blank page. Picked up my pen. Began rewriting what I believed, not the things I used to teach, but the things I'd lived through. Wrote that respect ain't something you earn by staying silent. That love don't mean erasing yourself. That boundaries aren't fences. They're a way for people to know where to stand without hurting each other. Wrote slow. Each sentence was short. I paused often, not because I didn't know what to write, but because I wanted to be sure every word was mine, not borrowed from nobody else. Before sleeping, I turned on the small lamp beside the bed, looked around the room again. Still small, but its quiet wasn't threatening. I lay down, pulled the blanket up, and for the first time in a long while, I slept without listening for nothing. Next morning, my phone buzzed while I was making coffee. Voice message from Zara. Didn't open it right away. Stood there a few seconds, mug in hand, heart beating light. Then I pressed play. Granddaddy. Her voice came through. Small but clear. Today I drew another tree. I left some space next to it for you to stand there. When you come visit, I'll color it in. Message ended with a soft laugh. I stood still a long time. Coffee cooling in my hand. Didn't feel like I'd completely left. Understood that some connections don't need the same roof to exist. Set the mug down. Sat on the bed. And for the first time since moving out, I smiled without feeling pain in my chest. I listened to Zara's message again on a quiet afternoon. Not because I forgot the words, but because some sentences need to be heard again after you've passed through enough silence to understand them. I sat in the chair by the window, late sunlight slanting through the curtain, making her drawing on the table stand out clearer. Pressed play. Set the phone down. Pressed play again. I left some space next to it for you to stand there. Sentence was so simple that if heard in a hurry, it could be missed. But to me, it opened a truth adults often avoid. Children don't need everything perfect to accept it. They just need to know there's a place for them. And for others. Without fighting. Without disappearing. I thought about all the times I tried to fill empty space in the old house with my own presence. Been there too much. Too ready. Until I forgot to ask, where am I standing in this picture? Zara, with a child's instinct, had left that space open. Not to hold on, but to acknowledge. That's when I understood the cost of boundaries. They ain't free. They take away crowded dinners, noisy mornings, moments that feel safe just because they're familiar. But in return, they give you something I'd lost long ago, the feeling of standing in your own place without asking permission. I didn't go back to the old house. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to prove nothing. Just knew that if I went back then, I'd slip into my old role. The man who kept everything okay by shrinking himself. Wasn't doing that no more. But I didn't close the door, either. Jerome texted from time to time. Short messages. Not much emotion. Just asking if I was okay. If I needed anything. I replied when I felt like it. Didn't guess intentions. Didn't read between lines. Let everything stay its proper size. Shanic. He sent me a photo of Zara drawing in her new class. I replied with a thank you. No more. No less. No dramatic reconciliation. No crying, no apologies. No promises to change. And I realized maybe we didn't need those things to keep existing in each other's lives in a healthier way. Distance, when placed correct, ain't coldness. It's space for each person to breathe without suffocating the other. I didn't need to be present every day to prove I mattered, and didn't need them to say my name in every decision to feel respected. One morning, I walked around my new neighborhood, found a small park with wooden benches, sat down, watched people pass by. Some old, some young, some alone, didn't compare. Didn't ask myself where I was supposed to be. Just sat there long enough to feel that life was still moving, and I was still in it. In my own way, I began writing more regular. Not to tell my story to nobody, but to keep it from being twisted over time. Wrote about things nobody says, but everyone knows. That love don't protect everything. That family ain't always a place you belong if you can't be yourself there. That boundaries don't make affection disappear. They just change its shape. Some evenings I missed Zara, so sharp it hurt. Took out her drawing. Looked at the empty space next to the tree. Didn't rush to fill it. Left it there. Because I knew some empty spaces need to stay open. So people have a way back. Not back to a house, but back to a connection that don't make nobody smaller. I felt enough. Not enough as incomplete, fulfilled, lacking nothing. But enough as in, I didn't have to ask myself what I was missing. No more. Had a small room. Quiet mornings. Connections that didn't demand. And I had myself. Standing upright. Without needing to prove nothing. When night fell, I turned off the light. lay listening to cars fading in the distance, thought about the years gone by, about Dorothy, about Jerome, about Zara learning to draw the world in her own way, didn't gather it all into a conclusion. Just let each thing rest, each in its proper place. And in that quiet, I knew I was ready for what comes next. Not to close the story, but to step into another way of living, where boundaries don't need explaining, only natural respecting. I am no longer silent to be loved, saying that ain't no powerful declaration for me. It's a very late admission. I once believed love had to be held together with endurance, that if I was soft enough, stepped back enough, didn't bother nobody, I'd still have a place in the lives of people I loved. Lived that way for many years, not just with my family, but with myself. Now looking back, I don't blame Jerome. Don't blame Shanice neither. Everyone enters life with their own pressures, desires, and limits. They didn't intend to make me disappear. I shrank myself long before anybody asked me to dot my mistake wasn't giving too much. It was never saying what I needed. I believed that love, if big enough, would understand on its own. But love, without clear boundaries, easily becomes so familiar it's taken for granted. I didn't understand this in one moment of clarity, but through days of slowing down, through quiet mornings, through listening again and again to Zara's voice, I learned that boundaries don't destroy love. They protect it from being distorted, from turning into obligation or silent endurance. Accepting that also meant accepting loss. I lost crowded dinners, lost the feeling of always being needed, lost a familiar role I once clung to for safety. But I don't see that as failure. I see it as the cost of living truthfully in what's left of my life. I ain't looking for a verdict of right or wrong. Don't think nobody in this story was completely right or completely wrong. We were just people who loved in the ways we knew how, and learned to adjust when the cost of silence became too high. And from there, I moved forward. Not loudly, not angrily, but with one clear choice. I no longer disappear to keep peace. I am no longer silent to be loved. The story you just heard is a work of fiction, inspired by everyday situations and very real emotional shifts. The content was created with AI support and edited by humans with the hope of offering reflection and human value. This story ain't meant to encourage nobody to imitate it, but simply to look together at things that are familiar, yet often overlooked in family life. Perhaps the greatest value this story leaves behind ain't a specific decision, but a gentle awareness that sometimes love don't need more. It needs to be placed in the right spot. And if there's a gift for you tonight, maybe it's permission to choose. To choose to speak. To choose to stop. To choose to live in a way that don't make you smaller. If you're still here, I truly thank you right now. Where are you watching this story from? A quiet room? A familiar chair at the end of the day? If you'd like, leave a comment sharing how you felt. Or simply tell us which city or state you're in. Every message is a sign that this story reached someone somewhere. If these moments meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Every interaction you give is real support, helping these slow, thoughtful stories reach people who need a moment of quiet to listen. Wishing you a peaceful night. And I hope when you turn off this video, you carry with you a sense of being respected, starting with self.